day. As you say, Highness. Messenger's voice was so neutral, he could have been commenting on the price of beans. Strange. He did not look like a diffident man. I have always been ready to die for her. There was no need for him to say which her he meant. I guess I am too, Messenge. Light, he thought he meant that. Yes, he did mean it. Did that mean he was in love? Better to live for her, though, wouldn't you say? Should you not be donning your armor, Highness? I don't intend getting close enough to the fighting to need armor. A general who draws his sword has put aside his baton and become a common soldier. He was only quoting Commandrin again. He seemed to do that a lot when discussing soldiering, but then the man had known just about everything there was to know about the craft. Just quoting, yet it appeared to impress the weathered man, who saluted him again, and asked bloody permission before riding back to his men. Matt was tempted to ask what that Highness foolishness was about. Likely it was just some Seanchan way of calling him a lord. But he had not heard anything like it in Nebu Dar, and he had been surrounded by Seanchan there. 5 figures appeared out of the forest at the foot of the meadow, and he did not need a looking glass to know them. The 2 Ogier in armor striped bright red and black would have told him, even if Vannin's bulk had not. The mounted men were at a flat gallop, yet the Ogier kept pace, long arms swinging, axes swinging like a sawmill's drive shaft. "Slingmen, get ready!" Matt shouted. "Everybody else, go pick up a shovel!" The appearance had to be just right. As most of the crossbowmen scattered to pick up tools and make a show of working on the trench and wall, 50 others strapped on their helmets and lined up in front of Eludra. Tall men, they still carried the short swords they called catgutters, but instead of crossbows, they were armed with 4-foot-long sling staffs. He would have liked more than 50, but Eludra only had so much of her powders. Each man wore a cloth belt sewn with pockets slung across his breastplate, and each pocket held a stubby leather cylinder larger than a man's fist with a short length of dark fuse sticking out of the end. Eludra had not come up with a fancy name for them yet. She would, though. She was one for fancy names. Dragons and dragon's eggs. One by one, the men held up long pieces of slow match for her to light with a striker. She did it quickly, using each striker until the long wooden stick had burned down nearly to her fingertips. But she never winced, just dropped the thing and lit another, while telling the sling men to be faster. She was getting low on strikers. Like when she was tight with the things. She had 5 more boxes that Matt knew of. As each man turned away from her, he put the smoking slow match between his teeth and secured one of the cylinders to his sling staff as he walked to the wall. There were wide intervals between sling men. They had to cover the whole length of the wall. "Time to get your people in place, Messenge," Matt said loudly. The Death Watch guards formed a single line abreast, with the gardeners on the end. Anybody who took one glance through a looking glass would know what they were. Like, all they needed was to see Ogier in armor and the sun glinting off all that red and black. And if they stopped to think how few of the guards there were, they would still see they had Matt outnumbered, and there would be only one way to find out whether Tuon was with him. Vannin galloped behind the wall, flung himself out of the saddle, and immediately began walking his lathered dun to cool the animal down. As soon as he passed the wall, crossbowmen began dropping the tools and running to put on helmets and pick up crossbows. Those had been laid so that the men formed 3 spaced ranks with gaps where the slingmen stood. It no longer mattered if anyone was watching from the forest. What they saw would seem natural. Matt trotted Pips to Vannin and dismounted. The 2 human Death Watch guards and the 2 Ogier went to join the others. The horses' nostrils flared with their heavy breathing, but the Ogier were panting no harder. One was Hartha, a stone-eyed fellow who apparently ranked very close to Messenge. Vannin scowled at the men who had not gotten down to walk their horses. A horse thief he might be, reformed or not, but he disliked mistreating horseflesh. "They went up like one of our night flowers when they glimpsed us," he said, nodding toward Eludra. "We made sure they got a good look at that fancy armor, and hightailed it as soon as they started getting mounted. They're coming hard behind us. Harder than they should." He spat on the ground. "I didn't get a good look at their animals, but I doubt they're all good for that run. Some will founder before they get here." "The more the better," Matt said. "The fewer who make it, the better in my book." All he needed was to give 2 on a day or 2 head start on them, and if that came from their ruining horses, if they rode out of the trees and decided he had too many men to take on, he would take that over a battle any day. After today's 6-mile gallop, they would need to rest their horses a few days before they were fit to travel any distance at all. Bannon directed that scowl at him. Others might go around calling him my lord and highness, but not Chelvannon. Matt laughed and clapped him on the shoulder before swinging back into Pips's saddle. It was good there was someone who did not think he was a fool noble, or at least did not care whether or not he was. He rode to join the Aes Sedai, who were mounted now. Blerick and Fenn, the one on a bay gelding, the other on a black, gave him stares almost as dark as those they had directed at Musenge. They still suspected he had something to do with what had happened to Jolene. He thought of telling Fenn that his stub of a topknot looked ridiculous. Fenn shifted in his saddle and stroked his sword hilt. Then again, maybe not. "What I told you," Jolene was telling Bethaman and Sita, shaking an admonitory finger. Her dark bay gelding looked a warhorse, but was not. The animal had a good turn of speed, yet its temperament was mild as milk water. "If you even think about embracing Saidar, you'll regret it." Teslin grunted sourly. She patted her white-faced chestnut mare, a much more feisty creature than Jolene's mount, and spoke to the air. "She does train wilders and expect them to behave once out of her sight. Or perhaps she does think the tower will accept age over novices." Spots of color appeared in Jolene's cheeks, but she straightened in her saddle without saying anything. As usual, when those two got into a conflict, Edicina concentrated on something else, in this case, brushing imaginary dust from her divided skirts. Enough tension to choke on. Suddenly riders poured out of the trees at the far end of the meadow in a torrent that swelled into a spreading lake of steel-tipped lances as they drew rein, no doubt in surprise at what lay before them. It seemed that not as many horses had found it as Matt had hoped for. Pulling the looking-glass from its scabbard tied to his saddle's pommel, he raised it to his eye. The Taraboners were easy to pick out, with mail veils hiding their faces to the eyes, but the others wore every sort of helmet, rounded or conical, with face bars and without. He even saw a few ridged Tyran helmets, though that did not mean there were Tyrans among them. Most men used whatever armor they could find. "Don't think," he thought. "The woman is here. That 100,000 gold crowns is waiting. Don't bloody..." A shrill Shan bugle sounded, thin with the distance, and the horsemen began advancing at a walk, already spreading out to extend beyond the wall's edges. "Uncase the banner, McCall," Matt ordered. So these flaming sons of goats thought they were coming to murder Tuon, did they? This time we'll let them know who's killing them. "Mandevwin, you have the command." Mandevwin turned his bay to face front. "Stand ready," he shouted, and under-officers and bannermen echoed the cry. McCall pulled the leather case off, carefully fastening it to his saddle, and the banner streamed on the wind, a red-fringed white square with a large, open red hand in the center, and beneath it, embroidered in red, the words, "Toiviandi se tovia sagain." "It's time to toss the dice," Matt thought, translating. And so it was. He saw Musenge eyeing it. He seemed very calm for a man with 10,000 lances coming toward him. "Are you ready, Aludra?" Matt called. "Of course I am ready," she replied. "I only wish I had my dragons." Musenge shifted his attention to her. Burn her, she needed to watch her tongue. Matt wanted those dragons to be a shock when the Shan first faced them. Perhaps 1,200 paces from the wall, the ranks of lancers began to trot, and at 600 they began to gallop, but not as hard as they might have. Those horses were tired after a long run already. They lumbered. None of the lances had come down yet. They would not until the last 100 paces. Some of those carried streamers that floated behind them in the air. A large knot of red here, a clump of green or blue there. They might have been house colors, or perhaps they marked mercenary companies. All those hooves made a sound like distant thunder rolling. "Aludra!" Matt shouted without looking back. A hollow thump and an acrid sulfur smell announced the lofting tube sending its night flower aloft, and a loud pop, the blooming of a ball of red red streaks overhead. Some of the galloping horsemen pointed to it as if in amazement. None looked behind them to see Talmanas leading the 3 banners of horse out of the forest below the lake. Their lances had been left with the pack animals, but every man would have his horse bow out. Spreading out in a single line, they began following the galloping riders, increasing speed as they came. Their horses had been ridden far last night, but not pressed too hard, and they had been rested all morning. The distance between the 2 groups of riders began to narrow. "Front rank!" Mandelwin shouted when the horsemen were 400 paces away. "Loose!" Above 1,000 bolts flashed out, dark streaks in the air. Immediately, the front rank bent to fasten their cranks to their crossbows, and the second rank raised their weapons. "Second rank!" Mandelwin shouted. "Loose!" Another 1,000 quarrels streaked for the oncoming horsemen. At that range, they could not punch through a breastplate despite heads designed to do just that. But men with shattered legs toppled from their saddles, and men with ruined arms reined in frantically to try stemming the flow of blood. And the horses. Ah, light, the poor horses. Horses fell by the hundreds, some kicking and screaming, struggling to stand, others not moving at all, many of them tripping more animals. Catapulted riders tumbled across the meadow grass until they were trampled by the riders behind. "Third rank! Loose!" Mandelwin shouted, and as soon as those bolts were away, the front rank straightened. "Front rank!" Mandelwin called. "Loose!" And another 1,000 bolts added to the carnage. "Second rank! Loose!" It was not so one-sided as an ambush, of course. Some of the galloping horsemen had flung down their lances and uncased their horsebows. Arrows began to fall among the crossbowmen. Shooting accurately from a galloping horse was no easy task, and the range was too far at the start for the arrows to kill. But more than one man struggled to work his crossbow with a shaft jutting from his arm. The wall protected their legs yet. Too far to kill, unless your target's luck had run out. Matt saw a man fall with an arrow in his eye, another with a shaft taken in the throat. There were other gaps in the ranks as well. Men shuffled forward quickly to refill them. "You could join in any time, Jolene," he said. "Third rank! Loose!" The Aes Sedai shook her head irritably. "I must be in danger. I don't feel in danger yet." Tesla nodded. She was watching the charge as if it were a parade, and not a very interesting one at that. "If you would allow Sita and me," Bethaman began, but Jolene looked over her shoulder coldly, and the Seanchan woman subsided and dropped her eyes to her hands on the reins. Sita smiled nervously, but it slid off her face under Jolene's stare. "Front rank! Loose!" Matt rolled his eyes to the heavens and muttered a prayer that was half curse. The bloody women did not feel in danger. He felt as though his bloody head was on the chopping block. "Second rank! Loose!" Talmanas had come in range now, and announced himself with a volley from the 4,000 bows at 300 paces that cleared saddles. Closing the distance, they fired again. Again. The enemy ranks seemed to ripple with the shock. Some men whirled about and charged at Talmanas' line, with lances coming down. Others began returning his hail of arrows with their own. Most continued on, though. "Form square!" Mandelwin shouted a heartbeat before Matt could. He hoped the men had not left it too bloody late. The band was well trained, though. The men on the flanks fell back at the run, as calmly as if arrows were not pelting them, clanging off breastplates and helmets. And sometimes not. Men fell. The 3 ranks never lost cohesion, though, as they bent into a hollow box with Matt at its center. Mesenge and the other human death guards had their swords out, and the Ogier were hefting their long axes. "Slingmen!" Mandelwin shouted. "Loose at will! Front rank! West! Loose!" Slingmen along the western rank shifted their sling staffs so they could touch the fuses coming from the stubby cylinders to the slow matches held in their teeth, and as the volley lanced out from the crossbows, whipped their slings back and then forward. The dark cylinders flew more than 100 paces to land among the onrushing horsemen.
Be right
Slingmen
back,
were already
everyone.
fitting more of the cylinders to their slings before the first fell. Aludra had marked each fuse with pieces of thread to indicate different burning times, and each cylinder erupted with a roar and a burst of flame, some on the ground, some as high as a mounted man's head. The explosion was not the real weapon, though a man struck in the face was suddenly headless. He stayed upright in the saddle for 3 strides before toppling. No, Aludra had wrapped a layer of hard pebbles around the powder inside each cylinder, and those pierced flesh deeply when they hit. Shrieking horses fell to thrash on the ground. Riders fell to lie still. An arrow tugged at Matt's left sleeve. Another pierced his right sleeve, only the fletchings keeping it from getting through cleanly, and a third ripped open the right shoulder of his coat. He put a finger behind the scarf around his neck and tugged. The bloody thing felt awfully tight of a sudden. Maybe he should consider wearing armor at times like this. The enemy flanks were beginning to curl in now, preparing to envelop the crossbowmen behind the wall. Talmanos's men still peppered their rear with arrows, but several hundred men had been forced to drop their bows to defend themselves with swords, and it was unlikely that all of the horses with empty saddles out there belonged to Taraboners or Amadisians. He had left a gap in the center of his line, a path for anyone who decided to flee. Yet no one was taking the offering. They could smell that 100,000 crowns gold. "I think," Jolene said slowly, "yes, I feel in danger now." Teslin simply drew back her hand and threw a spear of fire larger than a horse's head. The explosion hurled dirt and pieces of men and horses into the air. It was about bloody time. Facing in 3 directions, the Aes Sedai began hurling fireballs as fast as they could swing their arms, but the devastation they wrought did nothing to slow the attack. Those men should have been able to see there was no woman matching Tuon's description inside the square by this time, but their blood was no doubt on fire, the scent of riches in their nostrils. A man could live the rest of his life like a noble with 100,000 crowns gold. The square was encircled, and they fought to close on it. Fought and died as volleys from the crossbows lashed them and slingmen killed them. Another wall began to rise, made of dead and dying men and horses, a wall that some tried to ride over and joined in the attempt. More scrambled down from their saddles and tried to clamber over. Crossbow bolts hurled them back. This close, bolts penetrated breastplates like hot knives going into butter. On they came and died. The silence seemed to come suddenly. Not quite silence. The air was full of the sound of panting men who had been working those cranks as fast as they could. And there was moaning from the wounded. A horse was still shrieking somewhere. Matt could see no one on his feet between the wall of dead and Talmanos. No one in the saddle except men in green helmets and breastplates. Men who had lowered their bows and swords. The Aes Sedai folded their hands on the high pommels of their saddles. They were breathing hard too. "It's done, Matt," came Talmanos' shout. "Those who are not dead are dying. Not one of the fools tried to escape." Matt shook his head. He had expected them to be half mad with the lust for gold. They had been completely mad with it. It would be necessary to haul away dead men and horses for Matt and the others to get out, and Talmanos set men to work, fastening ropes to horses to drag them aside. No one wanted to climb over that. No one but the Okians. "I wonder if I can find the train," he said. And the other 6 gardeners shouldered their axes over the mound of bodies as if it were dirt. "Well, at least we settled this," Jolene said, patting her face with a lace-edged handkerchief. Sweat dotted her forehead. "You owe a debt, Matt. Aes Sedai do not become involved in private wars as a rule. I shall have to think on how you can pay it." Matt had a pretty good idea what she would come up with. She was mad herself if she thought he would agree. "Crossbows settled this, Marath Tamani," Musenj said. His helmet, breastplate, and coat were off. His left shirt sleeve ripped away so one of the other guards could wrap a bandage around where an arrow had gone through. The sleeve had come away very neatly, as if the stitching had been weak.
I'm trying to dig into my drawer real quick.
"Crossbows and men with heart. You never had more than this, did you, Highness?" That was not a question. "This and whatever losses you suffered." "I told you," Matt said. "I had enough." He was not going to reveal anything more to the man than he could not avoid, but Musenj nodded as if he had confirmed everything. By the time an opening could be cleared so that Matt and the others could ride through, Artha and the gardeners had returned.
I found the traitor.
Martha said, holding up a severed head by its hair. Masenja's eyebrows climbed to the side of that dark, wet-nosed face. She will be very interested to see this, he said softly. Softly as the sound of sword being drawn is soft. We must carry it to her. You know him? Matt asked. We know him, Highness. Masenja's face, suddenly seeming carved from stone, said he would say no more on the subject. Look, would you stop calling me that? My name is Matt. After today, I'd say you have a right to use it. Matt surprised himself by sticking out his hand. That stone mask crumpled in astonishment. I could not do that, Highness, he said in scandalized tones. You became Prince of the Ravens. To speak your name would lower my eyes forever. Matt took off his hat and scrubbed fingers through his hair. He had told everyone who would listen that he did not like nobles, did not want to be one, and he had meant it. He still meant it. And now he bloody was one. He did the only thing he could. He laughed until his sides ached.
Epilogue. Remember the old saying. The red-walled room, its ceiling painted fancifully with birds and fish cavorting among clouds and waves, bustled with brown-clad clerks scurrying along the aisles between the long tables that covered the floor. None seemed to be trying to listen. Most seemed stunned with cause, but Suroth disliked their presence. They had to overhear some of what was being said, and it was potentially dire news. Galgan had insisted, though. They needed to work to keep their minds off the disastrous news from home, and they were all trusted men and women. He insisted. At least the white-haired old man was not dressed as a soldier this morning. His voluminous blue trousers and short, high-collared red coat with rows of gold buttons embossed with his sigil were the height of Shandar fashion, which meant the height of fashion for the Empire. When he wore armor, or even just his red uniform, he sometimes looked at her as if he were under his command. Well, once Elbar brought word that Tuon was dead, she could have Galgan killed. His cheeks were smeared with ashes, as were hers. The ship Semirag had promised had brought word of the Empress's death and the Empire racked by rebellion in every quarter. There was no Empress, no daughter of the Nine Moons. To commoners, the world trembled on the brink of destruction. To some of the blood, too. With Galgan and a few more dead, there would be none to object to Suroth Sabel Meldarath proclaiming herself Empress. She tried not to think of the new name she would take. Thinking on a new name beforehand was bad luck. A frown creasing his face, Galgan looked down at the map spread out before them and placed a red-lacquered fingernail atop mountains on the southern coast of Arad Doman. She did not know what the mountains were called. The map showed all of Arad Doman and held 3 markers, 1 red wedge and 2 white circles, spaced out in a long line north to south. Has Turan gotten an accurate count of how many men came out of these mountains to join Ituralde when he crossed into Arad Doman, Yamada? Ephraim Yamada wore the ashes too, since he was of the blood, if only the low blood, his hair cut in the bowl and tail, rather than a narrow crest across an otherwise shaved scalp. Only the commoners around the table, whatever their rank, were without. Graying and tall in a blue and gold breastplate with broad shoulders and lean hips, Yamada still held some of the beauty of his youth. He reports at least 100,000, Captain General. Perhaps half again that. And how many came out after Turan crossed the border? Possibly 200,000, Captain General. Galgan sighed and straightened. So Turan has 1 army ahead of him and another behind. Very likely the whole of Arad Doman's strength, and between them he is outnumbered. The fool, stating the blindingly obvious. Turan should have stripped Tarabon of every sword and lance, Suroth snapped. If he survives this debacle, I will have his head. Galgan quirked a white eyebrow at her. I hardly think Tarabon is loyal enough to support that just yet, he said dryly. Besides, he has Damani and Rakan. They should offset his lesser numbers. Speaking of Damani and Bracken, I've signed the orders raising Tylee Kirgon to Lieutenant General and the low blood since you dithered over it, and orders to return most of those Rakan to Amadisia and Altara. Chison still hasn't found whoever created that little mess in the north, and I don't like the notion that whoever it was is lying in wait to spring out as soon as Chison returns to the Mulvane Gap. Suroth hissed, gripping her pleated blue skirts in her fists before she could stop her hands. She would not let the man make her show emotion. You overstep yourself, Galgun, she said coldly. I command the Forerunners. For the time being, I command the return. You will sign no orders without my approval. You commanded the Forerunners who have been subsumed into the return, he replied calmly, and Suroth tasted bitterness. The news from the Empire had emboldened him. With the Empress dead, Galgun intended to make himself the first emperor in 900 years. It seemed he would have to die by tonight. As for you commanding the return, he cut off heavy boots from the corridor. Suddenly, Deathwatch guards filled the doorway, armored and hands on their sword hilts. Hard eyes stared out of their red and green helmets to survey the room. Only when they were satisfied did they step aside to reveal that the corridor was filled with Deathwatch guards, human and Ogier. Suroth barely noticed them. She had eyes only for the small, dark woman in pleated blue with a shaven head and ashes on her cheeks. The news was all over the city. She could not have reached the palace without hearing of her mother's death, her family's deaths, but her face was a stern mask. Suroth's knees hit the floor automatically. Around her, the blood knelt. The commoners prostrated themselves. The Light's blessings for your safe return, Highness, she said in chorus with the rest of the blood. So Elbar had failed. No matter. Tuon would not take a new name or become Empress until the morning was finished. She could still die, clearing the way for a new Empress. Show them what Captain Lesenge brought me, Banner General Kharid, Tuon said. A tall man with 3 dark plumes on his helmet bent to carefully empty a large lump from a canvas bag onto the green floor tiles. The gagging smell of decay began to permeate the room. Dropping the bag, he strode across the floor to stand beside Suroth. It took her a moment to recognize Elbar's hook-nosed face in that rotting mass.
Hey, Christopher, how you doing?
Forward, prostrating herself.
I hope you're doing well.
Not in desperation, though. She could recover from this, unless they had put Elbar to the question. My eyes are lowered, Highness. That one of mine has offended you so deeply that you took his head. Offended me? Tuon seemed to be weighing the words. It might be said he offended me. He tried to kill me. Gasps filled the room, and before Suroth could more than open her mouth, the Deathwatch Guard Banner General planted a boot on her bottom, seized her crest in his fist, and hauled her upper body clear of the floor. She did not struggle. That would only have added to the indignity. My eyes are deeply lowered that one of mine should be a traitor, Highness, she said hoarsely. She wished she could have spoken naturally, but the cursed man had her back arched till it was a wonder she could speak at all. Had I even suspected, I would have had him put to the question myself. But if he tried to implicate me, Highness, he lied to protect his true master.
Let's
I
do a
have some
dab,
thoughts
y'all.
on that, which I would share with you in private, if I may be allowed. With a little luck, she could lay this to Galgun. His usurpation of her authority.
Using my nectar collector.
Tuon looked over Suroth's head. She met Galgun's eyes, and Abeldar's, and Yamada's, and those of every one of the blood, but not Suroth's. It is well known that Zyrad Elbar was Suroth's man completely. He did nothing that she did not order. Therefore Suroth Sabel Mel Darath is no more. This Dako Vale will serve the Deathwatch Guard as they wish, until her hair has grown enough for her to be decent when she is sent to the block for sale. Suroth never thought of the knife she had intended to use to open her veins, a knife beyond reach in her apartments. She could not think at all. She started screaming. A word was howled before they even began cutting her clothing off. The Andoran sun was warm after Tarvala. Pavara removed her cloak and began tying behind her saddle as the gateway wheeled shut, hiding the view of the opening grove into a hollow. None of them had wanted anyone to see them leave it. They would return to the grove for the same reason, unless matters went very badly wrong, in which case they might never return. She had thought this task must be carried out by someone who combined the highest diplomatic skills with the courage of a lion. Well, she was no coward, at least. She could say that much of herself. "Where did you learn the weave for bonding a warder?" Javindra asked abruptly, stowing her own cloak in similar fashion. "You should recall that I once suggested that well served by having warders." Red Riding Girl, no concern for the question. Before this. "Why would you be surprised I know the weave?" In truth, she had needed to ask Kiri, and had been hard-pressed to asking. She doubted she was suspicious, though. But bonding a warder was as likely as a woman flying. Except, of course, that was why she had why they had all come. Javindra was
good one there.
only at Tsutama's command, given when Pavara and Tarna could not come up with enough names to suit the highest. The angular sitter did not bother to hide her displeasure over that, not from Pavara, although she had buried it deeply around Tsutama. Tarna was there, of course, pale-haired and icy cold, her keeper's stole left behind, but her divided gray skirts embroidered in red to the knee. For Elida's keeper to have a warder would be difficult, though the men were to be housed away from the tower. It had all been her idea in the first place, and she was, if not eager, then determined to take part in this first experiment. Besides, the need for numbers was paramount, because they had found only 3 other sisters willing to entertain the idea. The primary task of the Red for so long, finding men who could channel and bringing them gentled, tended to sour women on all men. So the clues had been few and far between. Jezreel was a square-faced tyrant who kept a painted miniature of the boy she'd almost married instead of coming to the tower. His grandchildren would be grandparents now, but she still spoke of him fondly. Desala, a beautiful Kyrianan with large dark eyes and an unfortunate temper, when given the chance would dance any number of men to exhaustion in a night. And Melaire, plump and witty with a love of conversation, sent money to Andor to pay for her grandnephew's education, as she had for her nephews and nieces. Weary of searching out such tiny clues, weary of probing delicately to learn whether they meant what they might, Pavara had convinced Tsutama that 6 would be enough to begin. 2, a larger party, might cause some unfortunate reaction. After all, the whole Red Aja appearing at this so-called Black Tower, or even half, might well make the men think themselves under attack. There was no telling how sane they all still were. That was one thing they had agreed on behind Tsutama's back. They would bond no men who showed any signs of madness. That was, if they were allowed to bond any. Aja Eyes and Ears in Camelin had sent copious reports on the Black Tower, and some had even found employment inside it, so they had no difficulty locating the well-worn dirt track that led down from the city to a grandiose double-arched black gate, near 50 feet tall and 10 spans wide, topped by crenellations over a down-pointing central spike of stone and flanked by a pair of thick crenellated black towers that stood at least 15 spans high. There were no actual gates to close up the opening, and the black stone wall that stretched out of sight east and west, marked at intervals by the foundations of bastions and towers, was nowhere higher than 4 or 5 paces that she could see. Weeds grew along the uneven top, and grasses ruffled by the breeze. Those unfinished walls, looking as if they might never be finished, made the gate seem ludicrous. The 3 men who stepped out into the opening were not at all ludicrous, however. They wore long black coats and swords at their hips. One, a lean young fellow with curled mustaches, had a silver pin in the shape of a sword on his high collar. One of the dedicated.
How you been doing,
Pavara
Christopher?
resisted the instinct to think of him as equivalent to an accepted, and the other 2 as novices. Novices and accepted were kept safe and guided until they knew enough of the power to become Aes Sedai. By all reports, soldiers and dedicated were considered ready for battle almost as soon as they learned to channel, and they were forced from the first day, pressed to seize as much of Sidene as they could, made to use it almost continually. Men died from that, and they called it training losses, as if they could hide death behind bland words. The thought of losing novices or accepted in that fashion curdled Pavara's stomach, but it seemed that the men took it in stride. "A fine morning to you, Aes Sedai," the dedicated said with a small bow as they reined in before him. A very small bow, never taking his eyes from them. His accents were those of Murundi. "Now what would 6 sisters be wanting here at the Black Tower this fine morning?" "To see the Mahale," Pavara replied, managing to avoid choking on the word. It meant leader in the old tongue, but the implication of taking that alone as a title gave the word much stronger meaning, as if he led everyone and everything. "Ah, to see the Mahale, is it? And of what Ajas, should I say?" "The red," Pavara replied, and watched him blink. Very satisfying, but not very helpful. "The red," he said flatly. He had not remained startled very long. "Well then, and Kazan, Alcine, you keep watch while I see what the Mahale has to say to this." He turned his back, and the vertical silvery slash of a gateway appeared in front of him, widening into an opening no larger than a door. Was that as large as he could make? There had been some discussion about whether to bond men who were as strong as possible, or those who were weak. The weak might be more easily controlled, while the strong would definitely be more useful. They had reached no consensus. Each sister would have to decide for herself. He darted through the gateway and closed it before she had a chance to see more than a white stone platform with steps leading up one side, and a squared-off black stone that might have been one of the building blocks for the wall, polished till it shone in the sun, sitting atop it. The 2 who remained stayed in the middle of the double arch as if to bar the sisters from riding in. One was a Saldaean, a skinny, broad-nosed man just short of his middle years, who had something of the look of a clerk about him. A bit of a stoop as from hunching for long hours over a writing table. The other a boy, little more than a child, who raked dark hair out of his eyes with his fingers, though the breeze quickly put it back again. Neither seemed the slightest uneasy over confronting 6 sisters alone. If they were alone, were there others in those towers? Pavara refrained from glancing at the tower tops. "You there, boy," Dasala said in a voice like chimes. Chimes tinged with anger. The surest way to set off her temper was to harm a child. "You should be at home with your mother studying your letters. What are you doing here?" The boy flushed bright red and raked hair from his face again. "Samuel's all right, Aes Sedai," the Saldaean said, patting the boy's shoulder. "He's a quick learner, and you don't need to show him anything twice before he knows it." The boy stood up very straight, pride on his face, and tucked his thumbs behind his sword belt. A sword! At his age! True, a noble's son would have been learning the sword for several years at Samuel Alcine's age, but he would not be allowed to wear the thing about. "Pavara," Tarna said coolly. "No children. I knew they had children here, but no children." "Light!" Miller breathed. Her white nose sensed her agitation and tossed her head. "Certainly no children." "That would be an abomination," Jezreel said. "No children," Pavara agreed quickly. "I think we should wait to say more until we see Master... the Mahale," Javindra sniffed. "No children. What?" Aes Sedai, and Kazan asked, frowning. "No children what?" he said, when no one answered. He no longer appeared so much like a clerk. The stoop remained, but something in his tilted eyes suddenly seemed dangerous. Was he holding the male half of the power? The possibility sent a chill down Pavara's spine, but she resisted the desire to embrace Saidar. Some men who could channel seemed able to sense when a woman was holding the power, and Kazan looked like he might be hasty now. They waited in silence except for the occasional stamp of a hoof. Pavara schooling herself to patience, Javindra grumbling under her breath. Pavara could not make out the words, but she knew grumbling when she heard it. Tarna and Jezreel took books from their saddlebags and read. Good. Let these Ashamans see that they were unconcerned. Only, not even the boy seemed impressed. He and the Saldaean just stood there in the middle of the gate, watching, hardly blinking. After perhaps half an hour, a larger gateway opened, and the Mirandians strode through. The Mahale will be receiving you at the palace, Aes Sedai. Gorm. He jerked his head toward the opening. You will show us the way, Pavara said, dismounting. The gateway was larger, but she would have had to crouch to ride through. There'll be someone on the other side to guide you. He barked a laugh. The Mahale doesn't associate with the likes of me. Pavara filed that away, to chew over later. As soon as the last of them was through, near the white stone platform with its mirror-bright black stone, the gateway winged shut. But they were not alone. 4 men and 2 women in rough woolens took the reins of their horses, and a dark, heavy-set man with both the silver sword and a sinuous red and gold figure, a dragon on his tall black collar, gave them a minimal bow. Follow me, he said curtly in a Tyrant accent. His eyes were like augers. The palace the Mirandian had spoken of was just that. 2 stories of white marble topped with pointed domes and spires in the style of Saldaea, separated from a large space of bare, hard-packed ground by the white platform. It was not large among palaces, but most nobles lived in buildings far smaller and less grand. Broad stone stairs rose to a wide landing in front of tall, twinned doors. Each bore a gauntleted fist gripping 3 lightning bolts, carved large and gilded. Those doors swung open before the tyrant reached them, but there were no servants in evidence. The man must have channeled. Pavara felt that chill again. Javindra muttered under her breath, with a sound of prayer this time. The palace might have belonged to any noble with a taste for tapestries showing battles and red and black floor tiles, except that there were no servants in evidence. He had servants, though unfortunately no red Aja eyes and ears among them, but did he expect them to remain out of sight when not needed? Or had he ordered them from the halls? Perhaps to avoid having anyone see 6 Aes Sedai arrive. That line of reasoning ran towards thoughts she would rather not consider. She had acknowledged the dangers before leaving the White Tower. There was no point dwelling on them. The chamber the Tyrant led them to was a throne room, where a ring of spiral-cut black columns supported what must have been the palace's largest dome, its interior layered with gilt and half-filled with gilded lamps hanging on gilded chains. Tall, mirrored stand lamps stood along the curved walls, too. Perhaps 100 men in
Thanks,
black
Christopher.
coats were standing to either
That's
side.
one of many ones,
Every
many
man
of different
she
ones I
could see bore
got.
the sword and the dragon. Men with hard faces, leering faces, cruel faces. Their eyes focused on her and the other sisters. The Tyrant did not announce them, but rather simply joined the mass of Ashaman and left them to make their own way across the room. The floor tiles were red and black here, too. Taim must particularly like those colors. The man himself was lounging on what could only be called
I guess that's the
a massive chair as
perks
heavily
of
carved and gilded as any throne she had seen,
working in
atop a white
or
marble dais.
use
Pavara
of
focused on
working
him,
in
and not only to avoid
smoke
all
shop.
those eyes of men who could channel following her.
you get
Mazrin
cool
Taim drew the eye.
pieces.
He was tall,
Still had
with
to pay
a
for
strongly
'em.
built nose and an air of physical strength about him.
But we
Darkness,
got the
too.
employee discount,
He
and plus
sat there with
we
his ankles crossed and one
we
arm
had
hanging
first
over the
choice
heavy
pretty
arm of the
much.
throne, yet he seemed ready to explode into violence. Interestingly, though his black coat was embroidered
Because
with blue and
we're
gold
there
dragons
when
that twined
we
around
got
the sleeves
inventory in.
almost to cuffs, he did not
So
wear
we
the
had to
pins.
go through everything,
6
price it,
sisters
put it
of
up on the
Red
shelves.
Alja, he said when they stopped short of the dais. His eyes. She had only thought the Tyrant's eyes were augurs. Plainly, you didn't come to try gentling us all.
So I guess
Why
Hey.
did you come asking to speak to me? I am Pavara.
Still had to pay for him, but hey, can't beat
Dorila, also a red citizen.
having
The others are Tarner
first
Fayir,
choice.
the Salin Avanchi. I didn't ask your names. Taim cut in coldly. I asked how you came here. This was not going well. She managed not to take a deep breath, but she wanted to. Outwardly, she was cool and calm. Inside, she wondered whether she would end the day forcibly bonded or dead. We want to discuss bonding Ashaman as warders. After all, you've bonded 51 sisters against their will. As well to let him know they were aware of that from the start. We do not propose bonding any man against his will, however. A tall, golden-haired man standing near the dais sneered at her. Why should we allow Aes Sedai to take any... Something unseen struck the side of his head so hard that his feet left the floor tiles before he fell in a heap, eyes closed, and blood trickling from his nostrils. A lean man with receding gray-streaked hair and a forked beard bent to touch a finger to the fallen man's head. He's alive, he said as he straightened, but his skull's cracked and his jaw's broken. They might have been talking about the weather. None of the men made any move to offer healing. Not one. I have some small skill in healing, Melaire said, gathering her skirts and already moving toward the fallen man. Enough for this, I think, with your permission. Taim shook his head. You do not have my permission. If Mishraila survives till nightfall, he'll be healed. Perhaps the pain will teach him to guard his tongue. You say you want to bond warders? Reds? That last word carried a great deal of contempt, which Pavara chose to ignore. Tarna's eyes could have turned the sun to an icicle, though. Pavara laid a cautionary hand on the other woman's arm as she spoke. Reds have experience with men who can channel. Mutters rose among the watching Ashaman. Angry mutters. She ignored that, too. We are not afraid of them. Custom can be as hard to change as law, harder at times, but it has been decided to change ours. Henceforth, Red Sisters may bond warders, but only men who can channel. Each sister may bond as many as she feels comfortable with. Given the Green, for example, I think that is unlikely to be more than 3 or 4. Very well. Pavara blinked in spite of herself. Very well? She must have misunderstood him. He could not have been convinced so easily. Taim's eyes seemed to bore into her head. He spread his hands, and it was a mocking gesture. What would you have me say? Fair is fair. Equal shares. Accept very well and ask who will let you bond them. Besides, you must remember the old saying, let the Lord of Chaos rule. The chamber erupted with men's laughter. Pavara had never heard any saying like that. The laughter made the hair on the back of her neck try to stand.
The end of the 11th book of the Wheel of Time.
Hi, this is Laura.
Oh, thanks. I got a couple of things up, hanging up in my room. Just give me 1 second. Gotta figure out what to throw on now.
listened to it. After... This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.
Let's see if I can turn this.
The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. Translated by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Inferno, Canto 1. Midway upon the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward pathway had been lost. Ah me, how hard a thing it is to say, what was this forest, savage, rough, and stern, which in the very thought renews the fear. So bitter is it, death is little more. But of the good treat, which there I found, speak will I of the other things I saw there. I cannot well repeat how there I entered. So full was I of slumber at the moment in which I had abandoned the true way. But after I had reached a mountain's foot, at that point where the valley terminated, which had with consternation pierced my heart, upward I looked, and I beheld its shoulders, vested already with that planet's rays, which leadeth others right by every road. Then was the fear a little quieted, that in my heart's lake had endured throughout the night which I had passed so piteously. And even as he who, with distressful breath, forth issued from the sea upon the shore, turns to the water perilous and gazes, so did my soul, that still was fleeing onward, turn itself back to re-behold the pass, which never yet a living person left. After my weary journey I had rested, the way resumed I on the desert slope, so that the firm foot ever was the lower. And lo, almost where the ascent began, a panther, light and swift exceedingly, which with a spotted skin was covered o'er, and never moved she from before my face, nay, rather did impede so much my way, that many times I to return had turned. The time was the beginning of the morning, and up the sun was mounting with those stars, and with him were, what time the love divine at first in motion set those beauteous things, so were to me occasion of good hope, the variegated skin of that wild beast, the hour of time, and the delicious season, but not so much that did not give me fear, a lion's aspect which appeared to me. He seemed as if against me he were coming, with head uplifted, and with ravenous hunger, so that it seemed the air was afraid of him. And a she-wolf, that with all hungerings seemed to be laden in her meagreness, and many folk has caused to live forlorn. She brought upon me so much heaviness, with the affright that from her aspect came, that I the hope relinquished of the height. And as he is who willingly acquires, and the time comes that causes him to lose, who weeps in all his thoughts and is despondent, e'en such made me that beast withouten peace, which, coming on against me by degrees, thrust me back thither where the sun is silent.
Actually gotta, let me grab it real quick. A belt buckle that I can't remember my brother or my cousin got it for me.
Seen from long continued silence hoarse, when I beheld him in the desert vast, have pity on me, unto him I cried, whiche'er thou art, or shade, or real man. He answered me, not man, man once I was, and both my parents were of Lombardy, and Mantuans by country both of them. Sub Julio was I born, though it was late, and lived at Rome under the good Augustus, during the time of false and lying gods. A poet was I, and I sang that just, son of Anchises, who came forth from Troy. After that, Ilion the superb was burned. But thou, why'st go thou back to such annoyance? Why climb'st thou not the Mount Delectable, which is the source and cause of every joy. Now, art thou
It's
that
about to get dark
vigilance,
again.
and that fountain which spreads abroad so wide a river of speech?
Don't have a
I
very
looked
good
on
light
him
that I can
with
use.
bashful forehead.
And my light I have
Oh, of the other
is,
poets, honour and light,
it's one of
avail
these
me the
cheap
long
ones
study and great love
that you pull out
that
like
have
this
impelled me
that
to explore thy volume.
it eats up batteries.
Thou art my master, and my author thou.
I gotta eventually
Thou art
save up
alone
and
the one from whom I took
invest in a
beautiful
nice
style
light I
that
can
has done
have
honour to me.
for when I do my
Behold the
my
beast,
streams.
for which I have turned back. Do thou protect me from her, famous sage? For she doth
I
make
could
my
put
reins and
a
pulses
regular
tremble.
light in
Thee it
and,
behoves to take another road.
a regular light bulb in there,
When
but
he beheld me weeping,
when I do my
from this savage
streams
place thou wouldst escape,
at night like this, if
because
I have a
this
regular
beast,
light in
at
there,
which thou criest out,
my
suffers
dog
not anyone
Snoopy,
to
he
pass
won't
away, but so doth
he won't
harass
go
him
to
that she
sleep. He'll
destroys
sit
him,
there and whine
and has a nature
for me to
so
hurry up and
malign
like
and
shut the
ruthless
light off and sleep.
that never
But
doth she glut her greedy will.
if I have
And after
this
food
type
is
in, like a
hungrier than
green
before.
one or like a different colored
Many
one,
the animals with whom she
he's able to
roams,
sleep without it
and
bothering
more
him.
they shall be still, until the greyhound comes, who shall make her perish in her pain. He shall not feed on either earth or pelf, but upon wisdom, and on love and virtue. Twixt Feltro and Feltro shall his nation be. Of that low Italy shall he be the saviour, on whose account the maid Camilla died. Euryalus, Turnus, Nisus of their wounds. Through every city shall he hunt her down, till he shall have driven her back to hell, there from whence envy first did let her loose. Therefore I think, and judge it for thy best, thou follow me, and I will be thy guide, and lead thee hence through the eternal place, where thou shalt hear the desperate lamentations, shall see the ancient spirits disconsolate, who cry out each one for the second death. And thou shalt see those who contented are within the fire, because they hope to come, whene'er it may be, to the blessed people. To whom, then, if thou wishest to ascend, a soul shall be for that, the nigh more worthy. With her at my departure I will leave thee, because that emperor who reigns above, in that I was rebellious to his law, wills that through me none come into his city. He governs everywhere, and there he reigns. There is his city and his lofty throne. Oh, happy he whom thereto he elects. And I to him, Poet, I thee entreat, by that same God whom thou didst never know, that I may escape this woe and worse. Thou wouldst conduct me there, where thou hast said, that I may see the portal of St. Peter, and those thou makest so disconsolate. Then he moved on, and I behind him followed. End of Canto 1. Inferno, Canto 2. Day was departing, and the embrowned air released the animals that are on earth from their fatigues, and I, the only one, made myself ready to sustain the war, both of the way, and likewise of the woe, which memory that errs not shall retrace. O Muses, O high genius, now assist me. O memory, that didst write down what I saw, here thy nobility
sorry,
shall
everyone.
be manifest.
That light's dead, so it used to be on the dark
Guard
side.
my manhood, if it be sufficient, ere to the arduous pass thou dost confide me. Thou sayest that of Silvius the parent, while yet corruptible, unto the world immortal went, and was there bodily. But if the adversary of all evil was courteous, thinking of the high effect that issue would from him, and who, and what, to men of intellect unmeet it seems not. For he was of great Rome, and of her empire, in the imperial heaven as father chosen. The which and what, wishing to speak the truth, was stablished as the holy place, wherein sits the successor of the greatest Peter. Upon this journey, whence thou givest him vaunt, things did he hear, which the occasion were, both of his victory and the papal mantle. Thither went afterwards the chosen vessel, to bring back comfort thence unto that faith, which of salvation's way is the beginning. But I, why thither come, or who concedes it? I not Aeneas am, I am not Paul, nor I, nor others think me worthy of it. Therefore, if I resign myself to come, I fear the coming may be ill-advised. Thou art wise, and knowest better than I speak. And as he is, who unwills what he willed, and by new thoughts doth his intention change, so that from his design he quite withdraws, such I became on that dark hillside, because in thinking I consumed the emprise, which was so very prompt in the beginning. If I have well thy language understood, replied that shade of the magnanimous, thy soul attainted is with cowardice, which many times a man encumbers so, it turns him back from honoured enterprise, as false sight doth the beast when he is shy. That thou mayest free thee from this apprehension, I'll tell thee why I came, and what I heard at the first moment when I grieved for thee. Among those was I who are in suspense, and a fair, saintly lady called to me. In such wise I besought her to command me. Her eyes were shining brighter than the star, and she began to say, gentle and low, with a voice angelical, in her own language, O spirit, courteous of Mantua, of whom the fame still in the world endures, and shall endure, long-lasting as the world, a friend of mine, and not the friend of fortune, upon the desert slope is so impeded upon his way that he is turned through terror, and may, I fear, already be so lost that I too late have risen to his succour. From that which I have heard of him in heaven, bestir thee now, and with thy speech ornate, and with what needful is for his release, assist him so that I may be consoled. Beatrice am I, who do bid thee go. I come from there, where I would fain return. Love moved me, which compelleth me to speak. When I shall be in presence of my Lord, full often will I praise thee unto him. Then paused she, and thereafter I began. O Lady of Virtue, thou alone through whom the human race exceedeth all, contained within the heaven that has the lesser circles, so grateful unto me is thy commandment, to obey if 'twere already done were late. No farther needst thou ope to me thy wish. But the cause, tell me why thou dost not shun the here descending down into this centre, from the vast place thou burnest to return to. Since thou wouldst fain so inwardly discern, briefly will I relate, she answered me, why I am not afraid to enter here. Of those things only should one be afraid, which have the power of doing others harm. Of the rest, no, because they are not fearful. God in his mercy such created me, that misery of yours attains me not, nor any flame assails me of this burning. A gentle lady is in heaven, who grieves at this impediment to which I send thee, so that stern judgment there above is broken. In her entreaty she besought Lucia, and said, thy faithful one now stands in need of thee, and unto thee I recommend him. Lucia, foe of all that cruel is, hastened away, and came unto the place where I was sitting with the ancient Rachel. Beatrice, said she, the true praise of God, why succourest thou not him who loved thee so? For thee he issued from the vulgar herd. Dost thou not hear the pity of his plaint? Dost thou not see the death that combats him, beside that flood where ocean has no vaunt? Never were persons in the world so swift to work their weal and to escape their woe, as I, after such words as these were uttered, came hither downward from my blessed seat, confiding in thy dignified discourse, which honours thee, and those who've listened to it. After she thus had spoken unto me, weeping her shining eyes she turned away, whereby she made me swifter in my coming. And unto thee I came, as she desired. I have delivered thee from that wild beast, which barred the beautiful mountain's short ascent. What is it then? Why dost thou delay? Why is such baseness bedded in thy heart? Daring and hardihood why hast thou not? Seeing that 3 such ladies benedight are caring for thee in the court of heaven, and so much good my speech doth promise thee, even as the flowerets, by nocturnal chill, bowed down and closed, when the sun whitens them, uplift themselves all open on their stems. Such I became with my exhausted strength, and such good courage to my heart there coursed, that I began, like an intrepid person. Oh, she compassionate who succoured me, and courteous thou who hast obeyed so soon the words of truth which she addressed to thee. Thou hast my heart so with desire disposed to the adventure with these words of thine, that to my first intent I have returned. Now go, for one sole will is in us both, thou leader, and thou lord, and master thou. Thus said I to him, and when he had moved, I entered on the deep and savage way. End of Canto 2. Inferno, Canto 3. Through me the way is to the city dolent, through me the way is to eternal dole, through me the way among the people lost. Justice incited my sublime Creator, created me divine omnipotence, the highest wisdom, and the primal love. Before me there were no created things, only etern, and I eternal last. All hope abandon, ye who enter in. These words in sombre colour I beheld written upon the summit of a gate, whence I, their sense is, master, hard to me, and he to me, as one experienced. Here all suspicion needs must be abandoned, all cowardice must needs be here extinct. We to the place have come, where I have told thee, thou shalt behold the people dolorous, who have forgone the good of intellect. And after he had laid his hand on mine, with joyful mien, whence I was comforted, he led me in among the secret things. There, sighs, complaints, and ululations loud resounded through the air without a star, whence I, at the beginning, wept thereat. Languages diverse, horrible dialects, accents of anger, words of agony, and voices high and hoarse, with sound of hands, made up a tumult that goes whirling on, for ever in that air, for ever black, even as the sand doth when the whirlwind breathes. And I, who had my head with horror bound, said, Master, what is this which now I hear? What folk is this, which seems by pain so vanquished? And he to me, this miserable mode maintain the melancholy souls of those who lived without an infamy or praise. Commingled are they with that caitiff choir of angels who have not rebellious been, nor faithful were to God, but were for self. The heavens expelled them, not to be less fair, nor them the nethermore abyss receives, for glory none the damned world would have from them. And I, O Master, what so grievous is to these, that maketh them lament so sore? He answered, I will tell thee very briefly. These have no longer any hope of death, and this blind life of theirs is so debased. They envious are of every other fate. No fame of them the world permits to be. Misericord and justice both disdain them. Let us not speak of them, but look and pass. And I, who looked again, beheld a banner, which whirling round, ran on so rapidly, that of all pause it seemed to me indignant. And after it there came so long a train of people, that I ne'er would have believed that ever death so many had undone. When some among them I had recognized, I looked, and I beheld the shade of him who made through cowardice the great refusal. Forthwith I comprehended, and was certain that this the sect was of the caitiff wretches, hateful to God and to his enemies. These miscreants, who never were alive, were naked, and were stung exceedingly by gadflies and by hornets that were there. These did their faces irrigate with blood, which, with their tears commingled, at their feet by the disgusting worms was gathered up. And when to gazing farther I betook me, people I saw on a great river's bank, whence said I, Master, now vouchsafe to me, that I may know who these are, and what law makes them appear so ready to pass over, as I discern athwart the dusky light. And he to me, These things shall all be known to thee as soon as we our footsteps stay upon the dismal shore of Acheron. Then, with mine eyes ashamed and downward cast, fearing my words might irksome be to him, from speech refrained I till we reached the river. And lo, towards us coming in a boat, an old man, hoary with the hair of eld, crying, Woe unto ye, ye souls depraved! Hope never more to look upon the heavens. I come to lead you to the other shore, to the eternal shades in heat and frost. And thou, that yonder standest, living soul, withdraw thee from these people who are dead. But when he saw that I did not withdraw, he said, By other ways, by other ports, thou to the shore shalt come, not here for passage. A lighter vessel needs must carry thee. And unto him the guide, Vex thee not, Charon. It is so willed where there is power to do that which is willed, and farther question not. Thereat were quieted the fleecy cheeks of him the ferryman of the livid fen, who round his eyes had wheels of flame. But all those souls who weary were, and naked, their colour changed, and gnashed their teeth together, as soon as they had heard those cruel words. God they blasphemed, and their progenitors, the human race, the place, the time, the seed of their engendering and of their birth. Thereafter, altogether they drew back, bitterly weeping, to the accursed shore, which waiteth every man who fears not God. Charon the demon, with the eyes of gleed, beckoning to them, collects them all together, beats with his oar whoever lags behind. As in the autumn time the leaves fall off, first one and then another, till the branch unto the earth surrenders all its spoils. In similar wise, the evil seed of Adam throw themselves from that margin one by one, at signals, as a bird unto its lure. So they depart, across the dusky wave, and ere upon the other side they land, again on this side a new troop assembles. My son, the courteous master said to me, all those who perish in the wrath of God here meet together out of every land, and ready are they to pass o'er the river, because celestial justice spurs them on, so that their fear is turned into desire. This way there never passes a good soul, and hence, if Charon doth complain of thee, well mayest thou know now what his speech imports. This being finished, all the dusk champagne trembled so violently that of that terror the recollection bathes me still with sweat. The land of tears gave forth a blast of wind, and fulminated a vermilion light, which overmastered me in every sense, and as a man whom sleep hath seized, I fell. End of Canto 3. Inferno, Canto 4. Broke the deep lethargy within my head, a heavy thunder, so that I upstarted, like to a person who by force is wakened. And round about I moved my rested eyes, uprisen erect, and steadfastly I gazed, to recognize the place wherein I was. True is it, that upon the verge I found me, of the abysmal valley dolorous, that gathers thunder of infinite ululations. Obscure, profound it was, and nebulous, so that by fixing on its depths my sight, nothing whatever I discerned therein. Let us descend now into the blind world, began the poet, pallid utterly. I will be first, and thou shalt second be. And I, who of his colour was aware, said, How shall I come, if thou art afraid, who art wont to be a comfort to my fears? And he to me, The anguish of the people who are below here, in my face depicts that pity for which terror thou hast taken. Let us go on, for the long way impels us. Thus he went in, and thus he made me enter the foremost circle that surrounds the abyss. There, as it seemed to me from listening, were lamentations none, but only sighs, that tremble made the everlasting air. And this arose from sorrow, without torment, which the crowds had, that many were and great, of infants, and of women, and of men. To me the master good, thou dost not ask what spirits these, which thou beholdest are? Now will I have thee know, ere thou go farther, that they sinned not, and if they merit had, 'tis not enough, because they had not baptism, which is the portal of the faith thou holdest. And if they were before Christianity, in the right manner they adored not God, and among such as these am I myself. For such defects, and not for other guilt, lost are we, and are only so far punished, that without hope we live on in desire. Great grief seized on my heart when this I heard, because some people of much worthiness I knew, who in that limbo were suspended. Tell me, my master, tell me, thou my lord, began I, with desire of being certain of that faith which overcometh every error. Came any one by his own merit hence, or by another's, who was blessed thereafter? And he, who understood my covert speech, replied, I was a novice in this state, when I saw hither come a mighty one, with sign of victory incoronate. Hence he drew forth the shade of the first parent, and that of his son Abel, and of Noah, of Moses the lawgiver, and the obedient Abraham patriarch, and David king, Israel with his father and his children, and Rachel, for whose sake he did so much, and others many, and he made them blessed. And thou must know that earlier than these never were any human spirits saved. We ceased not to advance because he spake, but still were passing onward through the forest, say I, of thick crowded ghosts. Not very far, as yet, our way had gone, this side the summit, when I saw a fire that overcame a hemisphere of darkness. We were a little distant from it still, but not so far that I in part discerned not that honourable people held that place. O thou, who honourest every art and science, who may these be, which such great honour have, that from the fashion of the rest it parts them? and he to me. The honourable name that sounds of them above there in thy life wins grace in heaven that so advances them. In the meantime, a voice was heard by me. All honour be to the preeminent poet, his shade returns again that was departed. After the voice had ceased, and quiet was, 4 mighty shades I saw approaching us. Semblance had they, nor sorrowful, nor glad. To say to me, began my gracious master, him with that falchion in his hand behold, who comes before the 3, even as their lord. That one is Homer, poet sovereign. He who comes next is Horace, the satirist. The 3rd is Ovid, and the last is Lucan. Because to each of these with me applies
Do one
the
more
name that
dab.
solitary voice proclaimed, they do me honour, and in that do well. Thus I beheld assemble the fair school of that lord of the song preeminent, who o'er the others like an eagle soars. When they together had discoursed somewhat, they turned to me with signs of salutation, and on beholding this, my master smiled. And more of honour still, much more they did me, in that they made me one of their own band, so that the 6th was I, midst so much wit. Thus we went on, as far as to the light, things saying 'tis becoming to keep silent, as was the saying of them where I was. We came unto a noble castle's foot, 7 times encompassed with lofty walls, defended round by a fair rivulet. This we passed over, even as firm ground. Through portals 7 I entered with these sages. We came into a meadow of fresh verdure. People were there with solemn eyes, and slow, of great authority in their countenance. They spake but seldom, and with gentle voices. We threw ourselves upon one side, into an opening luminous and lofty, so that they, all of them, were visible. There opposite, upon the green enamel, were pointed out to me the mighty spirits, whom to have seen I feel myself exalted. I saw them, with companions many, mongst whom I knew both Hector and Aeneas, Caesar, in armour with gerfalcon eyes. I saw Camilla and Penthesilea on the other side, and saw the King Latinus, who with Lavinia his daughter sat. I saw that Brutus, who drove Tarquin forth, Lucretia, Julia, Marcia, and Cornelia, and saw alone, apart, the Saladin. When I had lifted up my brows a little, the master I beheld, of those who know, sit with his philosophic family. All gaze upon him, and all do him honour. There I beheld both Socrates and Plato, who nearer him before the others stand. Democritus, who puts the world on chance, Diogenes, Anaxagoras and Thales, Zeno, Empedocles, and Heraclitus. Of qualities I saw the good Collector, hight Dioscorides, and Orpheus saw I, Tully and Livy, and moral Seneca.
The Golden Bird from Grimm's Fairy Tales by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Translated by Edgar Taylor and Marion Edwards. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Bob Newfeld. A certain king had a beautiful garden, and in the garden stood a tree which bore golden apples. These apples were always counted, and about the time when they began to grow ripe, it was found that every night one of them was gone. The king became very angry at this, and ordered the gardener to keep watch all night under the tree. The gardener set his eldest son to watch, but about 12 o'clock he fell asleep, and in the morning another of the apples was missing. Then the second son was ordered to watch, and at midnight he too fell asleep, and in the morning another apple was gone. Then the third son offered to keep watch, but the gardener at first would not let him, for fear some harm should come to him. However, at last he consented, and the young man laid himself under the tree to watch. As the clock struck 12, he heard a rustling noise in the air, and a bird came flying that was of pure gold. And as it was snapping at one of the apples with its beak, the gardener's son jumped up and shot an arrow at it. But the arrow did the bird no harm, only it dropped a golden feather from its tail and then flew away. The golden feather was brought to the king in the morning, when all the council was called together. Everyone agreed that it was worth more than all the wealth of the kingdom. But the king said, "One feather is of no use to me. I must have the whole bird." Then the gardener's eldest son set out, and thought to find the golden bird very easily. And when he had gone but a little way, he came to a wood, and by the side of the wood he saw a fox sitting. So he took his bow and made ready to shoot at it. Then the fox said, "Do not shoot me, for I will give you good counsel. I know what your business is, and that you want to find the golden bird. You will reach a village in the evening, and when you get there, you will see two inns opposite to each other, one of which is very pleasant and beautiful to look at. Go not in there, but rest for the night in the other, though it may appear to you to be very poor and mean." But the son thought to himself, "What can such a beast as this know about the matter?" So he shot his arrow at the fox, but he missed it, and it set up its tail above its back and ran into the wood. Then he went his way, and in the evening came to the village where the two inns were. And in one of these were people singing and dancing and feasting, but the other looked very dirty and poor. "I should be very silly," said he, "if I went to that shabby house and left this charming place." So he went into the smart house and ate and drank at his ease, and forgot the bird and his country too. Time passed on, and as the eldest son did not come back, and no tidings were heard of him, the second son set out, and the same thing happened to him. He met the fox, who gave him the good advice. But when he came to the two inns, his eldest brother was standing at the window where the merrymaking was, and called to him to come in. And he could not withstand the temptation, but went in, and forgot the golden bird and his country in the same manner. Time passed on again, and the youngest son too wished to set out into the wide world to seek for the golden bird. But his father would not listen to it for a long while, for he was very fond of his son, and was afraid that some ill luck might happen to him also, and prevent his coming back. However, at last it was agreed he should go, for he would not rest at home. And as he came to the wood, he met the fox and heard the same good counsel. But he was thankful to the fox, and did not attempt his life as his brothers had done. "Sit upon my tail, and you will travel faster." So he sat down, and the fox began to run, and away they went over stock and stone so quick that their hair whistled in the wind. When they came to the village, the son followed the fox's counsel, and without looking about him, went to the shabby inn and rested there all night at his ease. In the morning came the fox again, and met him as he was beginning his journey, and said, "Go straight forward till you come to a castle, before which lie a whole troop of soldiers fast asleep and snoring. Take no notice of them, but go into the castle, and pass on and on till you come to a room where the golden bird sits in a wooden cage. Close by it stands a beautiful golden cage, but do not try to take the bird out of the shabby cage and put it into the handsome one, otherwise you will repent it." Then the fox stretched out his tail again, and the young man sat himself down, and away they went over stock and stone till their hair whistled in the wind. Before the castle gates all was as the fox had said. So the son went in and found the chamber where the golden bird hung in a wooden cage, and below stood the golden cage, and the 3 golden apples that had been lost were lying close by it. Then thought he to himself, "It will be a very droll thing to bring away such a fine bird in this shabby cage." So he opened the door and took hold of it, and put it into the golden cage. But the bird set up such a loud scream that all the soldiers awoke. Then they took him prisoner and carried him before the king. The next morning the court sat to judge him, and when all was heard, it sentenced him to die, unless he should bring the king the golden horse which could run as swiftly as the wind. And if he did this, he was to have the golden bird given him for his own. So he set out once more on his journey, sighing and in great despair, when on a sudden his friend the fox met him, and said, "You see now what has happened on account of your not listening to my counsel. I will still, however, tell you how to find the golden horse, if you will do as I bid you. You must go straight on till you come to the castle where the horse stands in his stall. By his side will lie the groom, fast asleep and snoring. Take away the horse quietly, but be sure to put on the old leathern saddle upon him, and not the golden one that is close by it." Then the son sat down on the fox's tail, and away they went over stock and stone till their hair whistled in the wind. All went right, and the groom lay snoring with his hand upon the golden saddle. But when the son looked at the horse, he thought it a great pity to put the leathern saddle upon him. "I will give him the good one," said he. "I am sure he deserves it." As he took up the golden saddle, the groom awoke and cried out so loud that all the guards ran in and took him prisoner. And in the morning he was again brought before the court to be judged, and was sentenced to die. But it was agreed that if he could bring thither the beautiful princess, he should live, and have the bird and the horse given him for his own. Then he went his way, very sorrowful. But the old fox came and said, "Why did you not listen to me? If you had, you would have carried away both the bird and the horse. Yet will I once more give you counsel. Go straight on, and in the evening you will arrive at a castle. At 12 o'clock at night, the princess goes to the bathing house. Go up to her and give her a kiss, and she will let you lead her away. But take care you do not suffer her to go and take leave of her father and mother." Then the fox stretched out his tail, and so away they went over stock and stone till their hair whistled again. As they came to the castle, all was as the fox had said, and at 12 o'clock the young man met the princess going to the bath and gave her a kiss, and she agreed to run away with him, but begged with many tears that he would let her take leave of her father. At first he refused, and she wept still more and more, and fell at his feet, till at last he consented. But the moment she came to her father's house, the guards awoke, and he was taken prisoner again. Then he was brought before the king, and the king said, "You shall never have my daughter unless in 8 days you dig away the hill that stops the view from my window." Now this hill was so big that the whole world could not take it away, and when he had worked for 7 days and done very little, the fox came and said, "Lie down and go to sleep. I will work for you." And in the morning he awoke, and the hill was gone. So he went merrily to the king, and told him that now that it was removed, he must give him the princess. Then the king was obliged to keep his word, and away went the young man and the princess. The fox came and said to him, "We will have all three, the princess, the horse, and the bird." "Ah," said the young man, "that would be a great thing, but how can you contrive it?" "If you will only listen," said the fox, "it can be done. When you come to the king and he asks for the beautiful princess, you must say, 'Here she is.' Then he will be very joyful, and you will mount the golden horse that they are to give you, and put out your hand to take leave of them. But shake hands with the princess last. Then lift her quickly onto the horse behind you, clap your spurs to his side, and gallop away as fast as you can." All went right. Then the fox said, "When you come to the castle where the bird is, I will stay with the princess at the door, and you will ride in and speak to the king. And when he sees that it is the right horse, he will bring out the bird. But you must sit still and say that you want to look at it to see whether it is the true golden bird. And when you get it into your hand, ride away." This too happened as the fox said. They carried off the bird, the princess mounted again, and they rode on into a great wood. Then the fox came and said, "Pray, kill me and cut off my head and my feet." But the young man refused to do it. So the fox said, "I will at any rate give you good counsel. Beware of two things. Ransom no one from the gallows, and sit down by the side of no river." Then away he went. "Well," thought the young man, "it is no hard matter to keep that advice." He rode on with the princess till at last he came to the village where he had left his two brothers. There he heard a great noise and uproar, and when he asked what was the matter, the people said, "2 men are going to be hanged." As he came nearer, he saw that the 2 men were his brothers, who had turned robbers. So he said, "Cannot they in any way be saved?" But the people said no, unless he would bestow all his money. He did not stay to think about the matter, but paid what was asked, and his brothers were given up, and went on with him towards their home. And as they came to the wood where the fox first met them, it was so cool and pleasant that the 2 brothers said, "Let us sit down by the side of the river and rest a while to eat and drink." So he said, "Yes," and forgot the fox's counsel, and sat down on the side of the river. And while he suspected nothing, they came behind and threw him down the bank, and took the princess, the horse, and the bird, and went home to the king their master, and said, "All this have we won by our labor." Then there was great rejoicing made, but the horse would not eat, the bird would not sing, and the princess wept. The youngest son fell to the bottom of the river's bed. Luckily it was nearly dry, but his bones were almost broken, and the bank was so steep that he could find no way to get out. Then the old fox came once more and scolded him for not following his advice. Otherwise no evil would have befallen him. "Yet," said he, "I cannot leave you here, so lay hold of my tail and hold fast." Then he pulled him out of the river, and said to him, as he got upon the bank, "Your brothers have set watch to kill you if they find you in the kingdom." So he dressed himself as a poor man, and came secretly to the king's court, and was scarcely within the doors when the horse began to eat and the bird to sing, and the princess left off weeping. And he went to the king, and told him all his brothers' roguery, and they were seized and punished. And he had the princess given to him again, and after the king's death he was heir to his kingdom. long while after, he went to walk one day in the wood, and the old fox met him, and besought him, with tears in his eyes, to kill him, and cut off his head and feet. And at last he did so. And in a moment, the fox was changed into a man, and turned out to be the brother of the princess, who had been lost a great many, many years. End of The Golden Bird. Hans in Luck, from Grimm's Fairy Tales, by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, translated by Edgar Taylor and Marion Edwards. Some men are born to good luck. All they do or try comes right. All that falls to them is so much.
Alright, everyone, I'm gonna call into the stream for tonight.
Cards are trumps. Toss them which way you will.
Well, I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone continues to stop by. I appreciate all y'all's support.